EnergyCAP makes software that brings energy, accounting, and sustainability teams together around financial-grade data. Our award-winning software solutions untangle your building and utility bill information and consolidates your data into one single source of truth. Try EnergyCAP Utility Management for portfolio-level energy and sustainability reporting, EnergyCAP Carbon Hub for financial-grade greenhouse gas accounting, and EnergyCAP Smart Analytics for real-time energy and sustainability analytics. EnergyCAP helps customers who are drowning in paper bills, manual processes, and cumbersome spreadsheets and enables them to execute, analyze, and report on the energy and decarbonization projects needed to create a more sustainable world.
Good afternoon. My name is Karen Shunk with the Energy Management Association, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar and thank EnergyCAP for sponsoring today's session. A few items before we get started. We will be holding questions until the end of the presentation, but we encourage you to submit them at any time using the Q&A button that you see at the bottom of the screen. If you happen to be experiencing technical problems during the webinar, please use the Q&A to inform the panelists, and our producer, William, will assist you. This presentation is being recorded and will be available for viewing in about a week. And for continuing education credit, everyone in attendance for the full webinar will receive a certificate of attendance sent to their email within 24 hours. If you're certified CXA or EMP, your CEUs will be uploaded to your respective portals a few days after the webinar. Today's webinar is Energy Savings Unlocked, a panel discussion on energy management best practices and ROI, moderated by Amber Artrip, Vice President of Marketing at EnergyCAP. Amber's based in the Bay Area and has over a decade of experience in the energy and sustainability software industry, where she is committed to fostering a sustainable and equitable future. Thank you again to everyone for joining us. And with that, I'll hand it off to Amber to introduce today's panelists.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. I've got a really great session for everyone with some great questions for our panelists. And first, I would like to introduce panelist number one, which is Melanie Stewart. Welcome, and why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself and your role?
For having me. I'm Melanie Stewart. I work for Optimized Systems, which is officially based out of Omaha, Nebraska, but we have offices in a couple different major cities, Kansas City, Des Moines, and Denver, to name a few. And we literally optimize HVAC systems to use less energy. And in doing that, helping our clients meet their sustainability and energy goals. We also are a pretty sustainable organization ourselves, and I got here from my history. I've been a sustainability manager, mostly in the healthcare sector, but for more than 15 years. So I'm excited to help people reduce their energy use and meet their goals.
Thank you so much, Melanie. And next we've got Michael Hoffman from the University of Arizona. Welcome, Michael. Why don't you tell everyone about yourself?
Thanks, Amber. Good morning from the West Coast. So I am the campus energy manager at the University of Arizona. We are the land-grant university in the state of Arizona. Our main campus is comprised of over 200 buildings, encompassing around 12 million square feet across 390 acres. We're an R1 research university, so we have facilities from typical office buildings through classroom and university facilities, state-of-the-art laboratories, athletics facilities, virtually everything that you can find in the facility sector shows up on our university, as well as a number of cooperative and agricultural extensions, which are part of our land grant mission. I've been in the industry in one form or another for about 25 years. I'm a certified energy manager with additional certifications, and we are currently on a path towards a net carbon zero goal for 2040.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that, Mike. And we're going to get right into it. We know we're here today to talk about energy savings. So we're going to pull up a poll here that's going to ask you a few questions about what types of data you are tracking for energy and sustainability savings purposes. So we've got utility bill data manually in spreadsheets, utility bill data and software, real-time data via smart meters, BMS or BAS system data, real-time meters and gateways, and other IoT devices. So please select all that apply. Oh, it looks like it might be, the poll might be a single choice here. So, but see if you can select all that apply. And then while we wait for the panel to come in, why doesn't the panel come in and share a little bit about which types of data sets are you using today for your energy management practice? Maybe Michael, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So we have a very diverse set of tools for utility and interval data. We have recently migrated virtually all of our utility provider bills to EnergyCAP. In addition to that, we have well over 1,000 utility grade meters across campus that are tracking all of our utilities on interval basis, which we pull into a separate data historian and then feed the pertinent data into EnergyCAP for use of the Smart Analytics module. We're unfortunately a virtual museum of building automation systems across campus. I think at last count, we're at 18 or 19 legacy systems, everything from old pneumatics through state-of-the-art Niagara J-spaced controls, as well as a host of other IoT devices that serve some of our security, access control, and public safety needs as well. So we cover on campus, well, I'm happy to say that the spreadsheet item is probably the only one we're not using anymore at this point.
That's great. I love the living museum of building automation systems. I'm going to write a blog about that, Mike. Maybe I'll bring you in on that one. That's awesome. I think a lot of people can relate to that, so I'm sure you're not alone. Why don't we go ahead and show the poll, and while we're reviewing the results, Melanie, why don't you share what data sets you're using?
I would agree with Mike. We run into a lot of different companies, universities, groups of any size and shape that are using a lot of different methods. I think spreadsheets were the most commonly used item. That was as state of the art as a lot of people could get, but now as more software and options have come up, that's the hope, is that you can use something that's better than just a spreadsheet and more real time. And so I really like the combination that people can use with real time data and smart meters, and even trending in a BMS system. But I like being able to put that into a software that can give you alerts and help you find issues right away, not when you get the bill and someone imports it into a spreadsheet.
Spot on. Yep. And we look at the results here, and you're kind of spot on. I think it's a close race between BMS data and utility data and spreadsheets, which I think doesn't surprise me. It's probably the most available data access that people have, followed by utility bill data software, which we love to see, but some opportunity, I'll say, in the interval data, real-time data space with meters and gateways and smart meters. So great. This gives us a good insight into kind of where the group is at. So as we get into the conversation, we kind of know where everyone's coming from. So thank you for participating. So let's kick it off. We know that utility data is a hot topic, number 2 on everyone's list here today. So, Melanie, why don't you kick it off and tell us a little bit about how you are using utility data at Optimize Systems?
So we help a lot of different groups with their utility data just to help manage what they have. It's a frequent saying that I know a lot of people have heard, but you can't manage what you don't measure. So looking at that data and knowing what you have and where you have it is super important. You don't know where to spend money on your energy projects. You don't know, where you've saved once you've installed, energy projects. And so looking at that data to kind of have a whole picture of what you have, especially on a campus type situation, we have multiple buildings, multiple meters, multiple commodities. And I think a lot of people have that you have old systems, you have new systems. And so you can look at that utility data and really understand what you have, where you're spending your money. and know where to go after different types of projects, or where to, just where things need to be fixed. So that's the prime way to start, I would say, with utility data, is just really understanding what you have and where your systems are.
I realize I'm on mute. We are live, folks. Apologies. I was saying, Mike, why don't you tell us a little bit about where you are at with utility data at University of Arizona?
Sure, I'd echo Melanie's sentiments overall. I think she's spot on. I'm a big fan of analogies and metaphors. So when I think of utility data on campus, I think of it almost in terms of facility biometrics. And I think about when you go to the doctor, either on a sick call or on an annual, and they take a slew of metrics on you, your blood pressure, your pulse, they send you to the lab. All that information is a lot of times a first indicator of a growing or potential problem that a physical symptom hasn't introduced to you as yet. And utility data is very much the same thing with energy systems in buildings, specifically HVAC, electrical systems, plumbing systems. A lot of times the first true indication that you have a problem or you're suffering from system degradation is a change in the utility analysis. It may be going up, it may be going down, but there's a variance that if you can record it and you can trend it and analyze it, will give you a really good insight into how your buildings are functioning, behind the walls and above the ceilings. And trends, of course, tell you where you can get your biggest value. As Melanie suggested, I can't figure out where the best building to start, where's the biggest bang for my buck. And as a public university, facing rising costs and everything that goes into organizational financials, we're on limited funds, and the resources that are allotted to us really have to stretch and realize the biggest ROI. I can't calculate that ROI or even speculate that ROI without the utility data. And then, of course, on the back end of these projects, if I do go in and do some sort of an energy efficiency initiative, be it replacing equipment or retro commissioning a building, improving lighting systems, I can't validate and quantify the extent of my initiative if I don't have that utility data to close the loop. And that goes obviously back to measurement and verification, which is probably the most data reliant instrument in our toolbox. So utility data really informs planning. It informs our vision of where the campus is, where the buildings are, and then it informs our relative success or further opportunities to tie up our utilities and slow the meter down.
I love it, Mike. I think you did a really good job of outlining a lot of benefits of utility data, right? From budgeting to identifying errors and anomalies that could be building or system issues that you need to go out and check, and then measuring and verifying energy conservation projects. I guess question to you guys, it's a little off script, but I'd be curious if you have any stories of measurement and verifying projects, like maybe one particular project and how you tracked that. Maybe thinking especially for our friends who are in manual spreadsheets, is measuring and verifying possible in spreadsheets, or did you do it in software? How did you do it?
Yes, it's possible. It's a little more labor intensive than if you have an enterprise level solution, but it is absolutely possible. In fact, when I'm certified for measurement and verification, and I've done quite a bit of it over the years, and you don't train on software. You train on, let me collect monthly or interval data and do the regression analysis and build your own analyses. I think measurement and verification is integral, and I think a lot of times it's an overlooked tool. We approach energy efficiency oftentimes as saying, I know what I need to get done. I have an idea of what it's going to do for me. Let me find the money and get it done. But the value of not only collecting the data after the fact, but having a good baseline and really being able to say, this is how the building or this system is using energy, and here are the externalities, those independent variables that impact the use of energy in this system or in this building, is really an underused tool. I think any energy manager or energy engineer that is trying to pursue and iterate energy efficiency improvements in a facility or on a campus really needs to get up to speed on M&V. It can be as simple as collecting your monthly data. If you're looking at a whole building, collect the monthly data over the last couple of years, collect the weather data, run a very simple linear regression. Excel can do it for you, and figure out if there are trends. What are the relationships between the energy that your building is using and the weather outside? We know that HVAC obviously is very weather dependent, and get a feel for how is your building reacting, responding to the outside conditions. Because if you know that with a little bit of self-learning, you can then project either forward, or you can back engineer what the value of your efficiency initiatives are. And you can do it in a very simple way on an annualized basis, and that will lead you into, now I can do it on a system level with multiple variables, more granular data. But it's absolutely integral, and I don't think we talk about the importance of M&V nearly enough in our industry.
Next webinar topic will be on M&V, deep dive on M&V for sure. I love it, Mike. Thank you. What about you, Melanie? Anything you'd like to add there?
I would agree, with the one exception. I think for people who are tracking data in spreadsheets, while it is true that you can, calculate all this in spreadsheet, and it's true that Excel will do a linear regression and things like that, it is my experience that I think that most people that are working in spreadsheets are not doing those types of things, in part because, as Mike said, M&V just doesn't get as much attention. But generally, people typing utility data into spreadsheets, sometimes they're energy people, sometimes they're accounting personnel, often not a CEM. And so to have the ability or the time, which I think that we don't talk enough about how much time people spend not only typing those in, but going to get weather data, going to look at different factors, and to run that is really challenging, and really easy to do it incorrectly. And so getting out of a spreadsheet and into a software that can help you with that already has the weather data, that can do different calculations for you to say, this is normal, even though your usage went up, this is normal. But then not only showing you difference in cost data, but cost avoidance, that I think it's super important that people look at what they would have spent. And I know sometimes cost avoidance gets a little hairy for people, but we all know that utility rates are going up. They're not going to go back down. And so, when you look at what you would have had to spend had you not, retrofitted those LED lights, or, optimized a HVAC system, it really starts to show you the amount of money that you would have had. And I mean, we've worked with some clients that actually equated it to an FTE that said, had we continued on with this path, we would have had to look at laying people off, because you have to keep the lights on, you have to keep the HVAC going, and that money has to come from somewhere. So not having to spend that money is super important, and super good to look at from a high level perspective.
Yeah, I really appreciate that take, Melanie. And we always, it's no surprise, spreadsheets are EnergyCAP's biggest competitor, right? Like, people are doing what they've always done in spreadsheets, and it's great and it works. But I think when you get to a certain scale, right, and the number of projects that you're tracking, the more efficient you want to become, the less time you want to be spending manually inputting data, and more time on activating projects, right? Software just comes in and really enables that. So thank you for that, for sharing that. So let's move on to our next topic, which is on benchmarking, another topic close to our hearts. Why don't you share a story about benchmarking that you use to pinpoint inefficiency in your operations? Mike, I'll let you kick it off with this one.
I think I know which story you want me to tell too. Well, I'll tell two stories. First of all, anecdotally, we benchmark every year for energy and carbon against peer institutions. And that's an important thing for us because as a university, we are in fact in competition with our peers. And one of the things that we're finding more and more with our potential clients, which would be students, prospective students coming to the university, is this generation of college students have a very different set of priorities than I think in previous generations, and sustainability and resiliency and climate are all on that list. And so it's important for us to be able to effectively benchmark ourselves against peer institutions and against the higher education industry, because it is a talking point for our admissions and enrollment people. The universities show up, everybody's aware of all these different lists that universities and colleges are rated on, and more a university's focus on climate resiliency and sustainability are showing up with a higher priority. A more effective story for this is really internal benchmarking. Going back to interval data, my utilities analyst came to me, this was sometime last year, and he said, hey, the student rec center, did something happen there because their water use has gone through the roof? Now, the student rec center has a fairly large pool. I don't remember the volume, but it's a large pool that is in use here in the desert more time in the year than not. And we identified a significant variance, a significant increase in water consumption. Well, I don't spend a lot of time at the student rec center, but I know a guy, and I called the building manager and I said, hey, go take a walk around your facility because our interval data says you got a leak somewhere, but I can't tell you where. I just know at the meter you're using a lot more water than you did. And he called me back the next day and he said, hey, Mike, can you send your plumbers out? We found a backflow valve, a solenoid valve that had stuck open and was pouring water out to the sewers at some very large rate. And I believe we calculated that it was going to be on the order of millions of gallons per year if it was left unresolved. But because we caught that variance from benchmarking and were able to deploy staff, first obviously reaching out to the facility manager and then getting our plumbing shop out there, we avoided a tremendous water cost. And water is king out here in the Southwest. So we take a little more credit for that story than even some of the energy avoidances that we've had. But that's a pretty good example of how an internal benchmark can set off an alarm and get you identifying problems that you didn't know you had.
And I can imagine water is expensive in Arizona too. So huge cost savings. That's awesome. Great story, Mike. Thank you. Melanie, would you like to share a story?
Sure. I think as Mike noted, having those benchmarks with your peer institutions, and it doesn't matter if you're a university campus comparing an athletic event, or if you're a movie theater or a clinic, knowing where you stand among your peers is super helpful to know how you're doing and kind of have an idea. But regardless of how well you're doing, then it can help you to push the envelope. And I've been in a handful of meetings where that was actually a decision-making point, is looking at a peer institution, whether it's one that you're in competition with, or even kind of a sister location within the same organization, to go, they're outdoing us, we need to do better, that we need to keep up with them. And so having that benchmark is a great way to argue maybe with the people that are above you in the chain of command, to help you get some money for some projects or to do some things, and then be able to show that data on the flip side of what it got you, and report back to those groups like the students and every chancellor, dean, student, whoever needs to know. And I think probably everybody has a story similar-ish, maybe not millions of gallons in the desert, but I think for us, it's having that benchmark is also important when you're looking at drift, that a lot of buildings you definitely want to catch, the broken pipe, the whatever that is going to cost you instantaneous money, but having that benchmark to really know where your building should be. So that is just those little things that start happening that cost you energy that aren't a problem per se, in the fact that you have a really big building and you have one damper that doesn't close all the way and is leaking by. Nobody notices that. No one's calling in a ticket, to have someone come look at it. And so when you start to see that drift, when a couple of those things pile up, that you can compare that to benchmarking data and say, we have something going on in this building, and knowing, where to go look or how to get started, or just to have a point that once it gets to that point, you need to go back and retro commission and go find those actuators that aren't working or valves that are sticking and go, back and save that energy, that you can make that decision. So I like it for big things and little things.
I love that, Melanie. You're really staying true to the name, optimized systems, right? Nothing gets past Melanie and her team. No setting and forgetting here. I love
Right.
that. Great. So let's move on to our next topic, which is personal favorite of mine. And I'm sure many on the phone are interested in this topic because according to the poll, not very many people are using interval or real-time information. So let's talk about the importance of real-time meter information for operations and maybe what people can be looking at, considering that, not too many folks on the call are using it today. Melanie, why don't we start with you this time?
I think, Mike kind of alluded to it, but the best use of real-time information is finding problems before they become really big problems, and knowing, where that is, at least to narrow the field. I mean, we were working with a client. We were actually supposed to have a meeting to talk about measurement and verification, and half the people didn't show up because they knew they had a leak, a chilled water leak, but didn't know where. And so they were sending out the staff to go look for squishy spots in the grass, to try and determine where the leak was. And so having that real-time data that can tell you when you're having a problem, right when you're having it. We work with a local community college that is putting in some sub-meters to help narrow their field on, what buildings are using instead of groups of buildings and things like that, because they had a water leak that was in a basement about 6 inches away from a floor drain, and nobody noticed it. There was no problem. It was just going right down the drain, until they got the bill, and their bill was $20,000 more than it should have been. And then they had to go find the leak, but again, it wasn't causing anybody problems. So it took them a long time to go through several buildings to find this problem, of which case then they still had to get the problem fixed. And so they spent literally tens of thousands of dollars that had they had real-time meter information, that they would have seen that spike, almost instantaneously and could have gone and looked for it. And if you're, metered down to the building level, then you have a very defined area to go look for that problem, and save yourself a lot of money. And that was part of their argument in putting in some of these other meters is, had we done this in advance, like that project pays for itself in what was 6 weeks of water charges. So.
Right. That's powerful. That's great. Thanks, Melanie. Mike, anything you'd like to add here?
Yeah, well, first of all, I've done that squishy ground walk myself, as well as took a tour of any one of our 1,100 mechanical rooms looking for green water on the floor for chilled water leaks. So I can commiserate, and I think it's bringing back nightmares. So if I start to act like there's a little PTSD, that's why. What I would actually point to is a different aspect of this, and it goes to managing your utility cost. For us at the university, we're on a large scale rate with the utility, which includes obviously demand charges and a ratchet. So for people who aren't necessarily familiar with a ratchet charge, a demand charge is normally a typical demand charge is a cost per unit. Usually it's cost per kilowatt at your peak demand over the billing period. So at whatever 15-minute interval you have demanded the largest amount of power from your utility, that becomes your demand charge. When you have a ratchet like we do, they compare your billing period worst peak to, in our case, 75% of our worst peak trailing the last year. So if we set a new peak, so for example, here at the university, we have 2 cogeneration systems and we self-generate about 42% of our load. And the real value there is not in the consumption, it's in managing our demand. We also have one of the largest thermal energy storage, or I should say ice-based thermal energy storage systems in the country, which we use to control our peak. So how do I control my peak and maximize the value of that thermal energy storage? I need real-time meter data, because so during the summer, when we're on our summer peak period, our central plant stationary engineers are literally watching the real-time demand at our substations from the utility. And as we get close to that period where we're going into peak, they start to move us off of chillers and onto our thermal energy storage, because they are managing that peak demand to avoid setting a new peak that would either cost us for the billing period, or even worse, become the new ratchet that follows us for a year. So at about 1:15 in the afternoon, they're watching that real-time data and starting to what we call burn the ice. And we can shut down as much as 2 to 3 megawatts of chiller power in favor of thermal energy storage, with the sole goal of controlling that real-time demand point. So that serves us to the tune of between $500,000 and $1 million in avoided electric costs just by managing that demand every year.
I was just going to ask you, and maybe you can elaborate, because this is like some of the most important stuff that happens in the back end that, you know, stakeholders high up at the executive level maybe don't know about. So how do you tell that story, Mike, of like, hey, all this work we're doing is really helping us avoid, you know, spending X this year? So how do you calculate that, and how do you share that with the higher ups?
Well, in the first case, we're lucky here in that in our facilities management operations, our senior leadership are very well tuned in to the intricacy and complexity of our utility services and to the value of effectively managing it. In this case, you're talking about dollars. And when you're talking about senior leadership, especially when it starts to get up to the C-suite, when it's getting reported to a CFO or a chief operating officer, dollar is king. So in that case, it's very easy for us to prove that, hey, that's, you know, let's call it $750,000 of utility cost that you did not have to spend, and that alleviated a burden on some other program on campus, or gave us the opportunity, ideally, to reinvest it in other energy efficiency. That's a slam dunk. Being able to demonstrate that the cost of maintaining the real-time data and being able to execute against it, right? The key here is data has to be actionable insight. Otherwise, it's just numbers on a screen. It's just a pretty report. But by virtue of having the real-time data at the fingertips of the operator who needs to make a decision on when to do something, that equates to this substantial reduction in utility costs. That's an easy sell. It gets more complicated when you try and sell projects like retro commissioning, where you're kind of trying to predict what the value is, even on the basis of real-time data. But in this case, it's very easy to say, hey, you know, we avoided peaks. We look at the demand charge. In fact, I just did this exercise with our director of utilities the other day, where we looked at the bills and said, hey, our demand is down by, I think, 10% from last year, but we're paying more to the utility. So we know that we're running into a problem with rates or consumption, but it's a very easy presentation because it's in dollars and cents. I don't have to educate anybody on what is a kilowatt and what is a therm and how do these things all come into play.
Fantastic. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I think that makes a lot of sense. We're going to go ahead and move on now. I've got 2 questions left, but for the sake of time, I may combine them. So let's move on to measuring ROI in energy projects. And the question I'm skipping is the tech stack that you use. So maybe if you can kind of combine the two to think about, you know, how are you measuring return on investment and energy projects? Also, how are you sharing that information? And then talk a little bit about your tech stack and what you're using at your org. So Melanie, why don't we kick it off with you for this one?
I think measuring ROI is very important. If you can pull it off, and there's straight cost. I mean, if you're a spreadsheet person, you know what you were paying and what you are paying now. But I think a lot of people, I mean, the budget is the budget, and if you're meeting the budget, then you're doing all right. But you can save energy and not save money as costs go up. It just kind of depends. And I think a lot of people felt this a couple of years ago when natural gas prices really spiked, that they had reduced some heating load and some natural gas use, but saw their bill stay the same, where it really just had to do with the natural gas prices being out of control. And so I think being able to show what you're actually saving on projects is really important, so that you can tell that story that we've been talking about, and being able to do that not only from a straight cost point, but as I mentioned before, from that cost avoidance is super helpful as well. That even if your bill stays the same, had you not reduced that natural gas, what you would have spent would have been 3 times as much. And, where would that money have come from? And so being able to show that number really speaks to people, I think. But for specific energy projects, I mean, I think everybody knows when they're getting into a project, there's a prediction that goes into how much you're going to save, whether it's in kilowatt hours from LED lighting or straight dollars. And you want to know that that's what you got, that you got the bang for your buck, that it's a helpful way to know that things were done correctly, that you kind of met that projection. And it's a way to show accountability. And so I think, we try to measure it all the time. Anytime I mean, shameless plug, I love using EnergyCAP for that, because it's so easy to go in and look. And run a report and see, how use has gone down, even use avoidance, which doesn't get used as often, but then also cost and cost avoidance. And we actually optimized a building that it was LEED certifiable, being that they went through the process and had the points, but they didn't actually pay for the certification and the plaque on the wall. And I mean, this building was only 5 years old and was a LEED certifiable building. And we were able to show them return on their investment. I mean, they made the money back on their project before the project was complete, because there were just different things to go find, things that happen, whether it was something that got installed wrong or something that was left in hand. I mean, stories that I think probably everybody is familiar with. But to be able to go back and show that return on investment is really important. And so I would vote to always do it. And I guess for a tech stack, I think smart meters are great. They're so easy to, have a platform to look at data, but you can do it a lot of different ways with data from your BMS system, different platforms. That way, there's a lot of different ways that you can get into your BMS. We also use a pulse accumulator sometimes, that people that don't have the money to transition to a smart meter, or depending on your utility, if your utility won't share that real-time data, sometimes they'll let you put on a pulse accumulator that essentially just shares that ping, and then you can get real-time data from that as well. So we've found that to be super effective.
Fantastic. And I'll ask you one more question, Melanie, before we get to Mike. But you kind of work with customers in a unique way. Are you ever able to make the case for all the cost avoidance and claw back some of that money for energy conservation projects or measures to further invest and save?
Yeah, we actually see a handful of people doing that. And we did some work with the University of Nebraska Medical Center, and their clinical partner is Nebraska Medicine. And that was their plan. They actually went out to save energy, and they tracked their cost avoidance and their savings, and then they reinvested that. So they essentially kind of started their own green sustainability fund that I know a lot of college campuses have, that you have people that kind of put money into that fund. And so if you can look at that data and know where to get the most bang for your buck, where you can get that money back the quickest, you just replenish that account and keep on going. And they were very effective at that they reduced campus-wide energy 25% in 5 years. And that helped them to do that. They picked the right project to start off with, saved money, reinvested that into something else that saved money, and just kept on going. So they could really domino affect that process in a positive way instead of in a negative way, and really see that savings help them over a multi-year period.
That's an amazing story. And I know there's going to be a question, but what was the first project that really kicked it off? What type of project was it?
All right. I would actually have to probably go back and look. They did a couple things. They started some pretty significant LED retrofits from T12s. They also did a pretty big, they have a sizable parking garage that actually had some like sodium halide lights in it. So going from that to LED, like they actually had the accountants call facilities and say there's something wrong with this parking garage because the bill's not right, because it dropped off that significantly. But then they also did some pretty significant optimization projects in some sizable buildings that really rolled for them, and they just kept going.
What an amazing story. Great job to your team on that one. That's awesome. All right, Mike, passing it off to you. How are you measuring ROI in energy projects? We talked a little bit about this, but why don't you elaborate?
Sure. I'm actually going to take your undisplayed question first about the stack, because it feeds in pretty nicely. We're lucky that we've had opportunity to engage in a number of key software platforms that have become really essential tools to our operations. I mentioned before, we have a utilities data historian that is polling all of our campus meters, as well as a few hundred data points from each of our central plants, and recording them at a very high granularity, multiple times a minute, and storing them essentially in perpetuity. We recently obviously onboarded EnergyCAP, both for smart analytics and the utilities management. And even prior to that, we engaged with an automatic fault detection and diagnostic system that we've been systematically deploying into all of our new construction, and basically any building that has a building automation system that will supply the data sufficiently. And from each of those platforms, we're able to pull some sort of an ROI. I'll qualify the concept of ROI with the thought that how you discuss ROI really depends on who your audience is receiving this information. I don't think people realize how much energy managers have to play armchair economists. There's a huge component of understanding finance and economic analysis that goes into being an effective energy management professional. And a lot of that shows up here in this question of ROI, because you have to understand what metrics make sense or mean something to your decision makers, right? First, the question is, what's the KPI? What's the key performance indicator? We talk most often about dollars, and that's obvious because decisions are made on resources, and resources come in dollars. In some cases, when you're talking to a technical audience, you're talking about energy, right? How am I reducing therms or kBTUs? But now again, with the world of sustainability, or the impact that sustainability is having on our world, I know of other universities where the primary ROI that they're reporting is metric CO2. One university back on the East Coast, as I understand it, is only reporting now on all of their improvements in terms of avoided MTCO2 equivalents. It depends on who your audience is. Even when you talk about finance, a simple ROI, hey, this thing will pay back in X months or X years, will have a certain impact. But when you're talking about a larger investment, maybe we need to talk in terms of a net present value. The value of this expenditure, the value of this investment now is better than if you did something else with it. When I've written up some of my proposals, I've included a simple payback in terms of time, with a net present value, with an internal rate of return, to show that this initiative as a financial investment will return better than if we left it in the bank, or, you know, whatever the organization's current minimum internal rate of return is. So you have to be willing to flex with your audience, and spend some time. And maybe it's in, I'm not going to lie, I spent quite a bit of time in Investopedia, making sure I understood the terminology that a CFO is thinking in, or a chief budget officer. Every one of those software I mentioned give me an ROI. My fault detection and diagnostics does a phenomenal job of quantifying the cost of not responding to a diagnostics issue. We had a huge gain a couple of years ago in our aerospace and mechanical engineering building, where an air handler per AFDD was wildly out of control. And when we dug into the software, we found out that we had multiple problems that probably originated from the installing contractor and were not properly commissioned. And just by our senior building automations director going in and changing economizer cycles and fixing simultaneous heating and cooling, that one air handler saved us, I think it was $50,000 a year in avoidable energy. That's a huge ROI. Again, it's a slam dunk. Out of our utility bill analysis, I mentioned earlier the water at the rec center pool, but being able to do that M&V that I talked about and show that changing something, improving something over its baseline, I can very quickly prove the financial benefit. Same thing with carbon. You know, when we talk about decarbonizing campus, and the sustainability people say, well, what does this mean for our greenhouse gas inventory or our emissions inventory? It's very easy to say, as long as, shameless plug, you have the data, right? But not only that you're saving the data, but that you have it in a repository that allows you to turn it into actionable insight. And then the ROI is, again, who's your audience? Financial, engineering, sustainability. If you have the data and you can work with it, you can report on all of these metrics and do it almost real time, right? As frequently as you need to, you can rerun that calculation or rerun that report and say, here's what it looks like now, here's what it looks like year to date, here's year to date versus last year to date, all those different kinds of intervals.
This is great, Mike, because what I'm thinking about as you're talking is like energy managers have really had to evolve in the last like 10 years, from keeping the lights on, keeping the systems and facilities running, making sure we're staying under budget. But now it's so much more. It's almost like a business role, right? Where you're making business cases and you're reporting to key stakeholders, like financial data. It really seems like a huge, almost like evolution in the role.
So I'm going to grab that softball because, and I'm going to quote one of my professors. I have a master's degree in facilities management from Pratt Institute, and one of my instructors is a consultant named Russell Olson. And what he put out one day was, in any industry, doesn't matter what your market is, a facilities management team, as it's perceived by the C-suite, can be viewed through one of two lenses. Either it's a cost center or it's an asset center. Now, the truth is the vast majority of C-suite holders will look at a facilities management team as a cost center. And when you think of a cost center, what you're looking to do is cut the cost, right? How do I spend less money on this endeavor? However, I would guess that just about everybody on the webinar realizes that your customers, your building occupants, your students and faculty, in my case, could not function at all, or at least to their maximum efficacy, without the facilities and infrastructure that we all collectively maintain and operate and repair and replace and try and save money. What we really are is an asset center. And once you, or if you can convince your C-suite to change the lens and recognize the reality of how integral your facility and the operation of your facilities is to your core mission, Then you can talk about assets. And with assets, we want to make strategic investments. And everything that we're talking about here really comes down to strategic investment in the maximum efficiency and efficacy of your facilities and infrastructure. That's all we're doing here. There's no voodoo magic to energy management. At the end of the day, we're looking for efficiency, and efficiency in energy and utilities and building operation is no different than efficiency in my production line of widgets if I'm a widget company. I want to be able to maximize my output for the minimum input and use my equipment and my resources as best as I can. That's all we're doing. But because we're talking in these alien terms of energy and therms and CO2 and sustainability, the message sometimes gets muddied when we get up to the C-suite. And that's why we get stuck having to translate into dollars and cents. The key takeaway for me is always, how do I demonstrate to my decision makers that everything I'm proposing is a strategic investment in the asset that they intend to use?
I love that, Mike. I think we could have a whole webinar on that topic and how you did that there, your organization. But I want to quickly show our customers at EnergyCAP. We have about 1,000 customers across the globe utilizing our software for utility management, energy management, and carbon accounting. We did a poll of our customer database because the Department of Energy and Lawrence Berkeley National Lab released some survey results over an 8-year study of surveying energy management software users across software platforms across the whole United States. And they found the average annual energy savings to be around 3%. And we were like, it would be fun to survey our customers and see what they're seeing. And we did this survey. We compiled all the results into an ebook. You can go check it out. I'll send a link later. But what we found with EnergyCAP customers is that the majority of EnergyCAP customers are saving 10% or more on year-over-year utility bill spend, which is huge, well over the average. And then if you compile the whole average of all of our customers, the average is 7.5%. So much more savings with EnergyCAP utility management. I just like to think our customers are the most advanced folks out there. So it's really, really impressive. Check out the survey. There's a bunch of other stats in here too that you can check out. If you're interested in our software, you can scan this QR code and download the ebook. But we got some really great questions. We have about 10 minutes to go, and I want to get to at least a few of these. So let's jump right in. A really fair question we got is, I'll open it up to both of you, whoever would like to respond. The participant said, for benchmarking, I can use Energy Star Portfolio Manager. For costs and for performance analysis, I can use RetScreen for weather normalization. Why should I use EnergyCAP? Totally fair question. I don't know if any of you would like to respond to that. We talked a little bit about it, but maybe a more direct.
I can jump on this because I've actually had similar conversations. So it is definitely a fair question. My challenge, I've used Energy Star Portfolio Manager innumerable times in my career. I think it's a phenomenal tool. I've also used RetScreen. I think it's a powerful tool. The difference here is, first of all, Energy Star Portfolio Manager is manual entry unless you have some software that's going to automatically push it up for you. Otherwise, you're sitting there and doing uploads or manual entry into the tool, and you're benchmarking against a third-party metric, right? In this case, it's the CBEX, whatever year they're holding by, and it's always some previous year. They don't get updated as quickly as they would like to. For me, as an energy manager at a university, I don't find Energy Star Portfolio Manager that useful yet, because the value in Energy Star Portfolio Manager relies entirely on the depth and breadth of the data set they have in CBEX for a given building type. And for the college university landscape, as well as some of the subclasses we have, like laboratories or university buildings, the database is not yet that robust. It happens to be that Energy Star is making a concerted effort right now. They have the higher education benchmarking initiative that's been going on, and they're trying to get there. But for right now, me comparing against the Energy Star or the CBEX is not a good decision-making tool. Now, if I was running a skyscraper on 6th Avenue in Manhattan, and I'm benchmarking against 1,000 other mid and high-rise or skyscraper office buildings that have similar parameters, then it's a great tool. But again, it's a manual tool. At best, you can push the data up by spreadsheet. Same thing with RedScreen. It's an incredibly powerful tool, and it will do a lot of the lift for you, but it's not automated and it's not real time. The difference here with EnergyCAP is when it's connected to your data, whether they're scraping your utility bills or they're pulling in interval data, it's a force multiplier. It's doing all that work for you. All your analyses are set up. I can open up EnergyCAP, literally go to a dashboard, and the information is there. And then I can push it to Energy Star, or I can export the data if I want to play with it. But it's a different environment when you have an enterprise level product that is pulling the data in, doing all the data cleaning and churning, and then making it visually, fingertip available.
Awesome. Like, anything you want to add there, Melanie?
I would agree. I'm not super familiar with RedScreen, but I mean, Portfolio Manager is at best a database. It's like, say, your best case scenario, you're manually importing from a spreadsheet. And it's really just use and cost and nothing else. And if you really get in the weeds, it'll do some other things, but it's just kind of a data holder. And it's great for when, if you're part of a project. I know there's I'm going to blank on the name now, the better buildings for campuses. And there's a lot of municipalities around the country that are now, mandating some changes in energy use and carbon consumption. And they use Energy Star Portfolio Manager because it's free. But it's better, in my opinion, to have something that you can actually work with your data and then just push it to Portfolio Manager, as opposed to actually trusting that for your system. The granularity just isn't there.
Excellent. We've got just like 2 minutes, but we've got a good question about educational outcomes. So this person works for a large school district. They've got all the tools in place, but they struggle to get buy-in from the school board and executive leadership because of their laser focus on educational outcomes. Any advice for this person?
I think educational outcomes are tied into HVAC. I think you can make, there is data out there that you can find that talks about comfort in classrooms and how well people learn, as opposed to being, shivering in the cold or really warm and probably falling asleep. But I totally empathize. I mean, schools across the country just don't have enough money. And that's where you really have to kind of get into where your executive leadership is and what's important. And so if you can tie that to an educational outcome and then hit them someplace else that's important, presumably money, to say, we can do this, we can help. How often does facilities really get a help with educational outcomes, and say, we can help with what's important to you, but also save you money and show that. That's a really powerful argument. And so being able to tie those things together it can be really helpful.
That's right.
I would go back to the budget question as well. When you look at any of the large school districts, and whether it's in Tucson, Phoenix, Albuquerque, New York, right? Budgets are really shrinking for K-12 districts. So the question is, if your utilities budget has any impact on the resources that get sent to the educational programs, showing them that you can avoid spending money that could be diverted to the classroom should be at least get their attention. right? So if you can package up and predict that buying an EnergyCAP or a similar platform and being able to execute on the actionable insight will avoid cost that can be redirected to better serve students and faculty, that would be a good starting point. You've got to sharpen the pencil and do a little bit of predictive analysis. And in that case, I would recommend, in the case of EnergyCAP, getting with Amber, getting with their team, and they can show you how deploying a system like this or a fault detection system will take you through that conversation.
Excellent. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Melanie, this was an amazing conversation. I learned a bunch and took away a ton of new blog ideas. So thank you guys both for that. And Karen, I'll pass it back to you.
Whew. All right. Well, that's a wrap for today's webinar. And that was really, really great conversation. Thank you, Amber, Melanie, and Michael. I really learned a lot too. I really appreciate it. And thank you again to our sponsor, EnergyCAP. And if you guys want to do that M&B webinar, let me know. Our next scheduled event for EMA is the Virtual Operations and Management Training for engineers and facility managers with Al LaPera. Might get a little M&V conversation in there as well. That'll be next month, September 25th and 26th. So thank you again.